you do want a pathway to citizenship
Yes.
for roughly 11 million undocumented immigrants,
Yes.
and that would be essential in any bill for you.
Well, yes.
Mark Morgan is joining me today. He is a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, as well as the former acting commissioner of Customs and Border Protection. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Samantha, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Now, during a town hall on Tuesday, President Biden talked about a pathway for citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants. And just this week, he and other Democrats are set to introduce a bill to do just that. First and foremost, what are your thoughts on this, and what impact could this potentially have?
Well, I think it's important when we talk about what this current administration is doing is that we don't focus just on one element. It's much more than what he's trying to do with Amnesty. And look, there's a lot of studies out there. I'd like to really know what research and data they have to say it's just 11 million. There are plenty of research data out there that says it's by far greater than that. Could be up to 20 million people that are in the country illegally. But it's not just Amnesty. It's the fact that he's ended MPP, the Remain in Mexico, that really was instrumental in ending catch and release. He wanted to give and stop lawful deportations for 100 days. He wants to give free health care, expand DACA. He ended the asylum cooperation agreements with the Northern Triangle countries. He stopped building the border wall system. Look, Samantha, I could go on and on and on. It's not just one thing. It's a series of things. And we're really shepherding in a new era where we're seeing the United States government encouraging, incentivizing, and facilitating illegal migration. It's really, I don't understand why it's happening right now.
Can you talk a little bit about, what a potential alternative could be if it's not granting these 11 million undocumented immigrants, a pathway to citizenship? It seems unrealistic to sort of try and deport them all. So is there any other alternative that you would support?
There has to be alternatives. What I will say, though, is from a law enforcement perspective, here's the conundrum we're in. And this isn't about the Trump administration. This is about Congress failing to do their job decade after decade. This has been a problem that's been ongoing for a very long time. And I remember back under a Republican administration, they talked about amnesty under the Reagan administration, where they said, well, it'll be a one-time thing. The problem is with amnesty is if you give amnesty to the people right now, what about the people that are entering the country illegally at this moment? Right now, the Biden administration is reinstating catch and release. So they're releasing new illegal immigrants into the country, while at the same time, they're preventing ICE from deporting them. So today we give amnesty to those that are in the country illegally. What about 4 or 5 years from now to the illegal aliens that they let in the country and prohibited from being deported? What do we do with those individuals 4 and 5 years from now? That's the problem, Samantha. Amnesty cannot be the answer as long as we have not fixed the illegal migration crisis that's ongoing right now.
You talked a little bit about the Northern Triangle countries and that agreement that I believe you said that Joe Biden has since removed the United States. Is that correct?
That's correct. The
Okay.
ACAs, as we call them, the Asylum Cooperative Agreements with all three of the Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And this is where it really kind of made sense, is that, look, if you really have a legitimate asylum claim where you're fleeing persecution, it only makes sense that individual family should seek relief in the first country that they come to. It just makes sense. They should not get to forum shop, which is what they're doing. Now, I don't blame them, because this country is the greatest country on the face of the planet. But that is not the way the asylum process should work. And that's not the international standards. The international standards are, if you have a legitimate claim, you should apply for relief in the first safe third country you come to. That really is the genesis behind the cooperative agreements, with Biden just ended.
I want to get your thoughts on a recent bipartisan bill that was introduced by Senators Dick Durbin and Lindsey Graham, the DREAM Act of 2021. I'm just going to read the description to you. It would allow immigrant students without lawful status who were brought here as children and grew up in the United States to earn lawful permanent residence and eventually American citizenship. What are your thoughts on this? I know that this type of legislation had been introduced twice before. So what do you think of this? Do you think it will succeed this time?
Look, I think what we have to do whenever we're talking about how we're going to address this crisis, we first have to talk about what are we going to do then in the future? So what we're talking about now is addressing the mess that again has been created over decades, but yet we're still in the middle of continuing the mess. So I hope that any legislation tries to address the mess that we have, again, that's been created over decades, but then stops the bleeding that's happening right now. But that's not what's happening. The Biden administration has again turned on the spigot for illegal immigration. So the crisis that we got into because of decades of failure, we're still doing the same thing today and creating the next crisis, and we'll be having the same conversations 5-6 years from now. At the end of the day, Congress has to do something to not only address the mess we have, but then to stop the issues that are creating the crisis ongoing right now.
What do you think Congress should do? I mean, with your experience and your expertise from your background, what should they be doing?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and we've been saying it for a very long time. First of all, they have to fix the Florida settlement agreement. That's the unconscionable ruling that says that the United States, we can only detain families and unaccompanied minors for 20 days. We simply cannot get them through the laborious immigration process within 20 days. That was really the genesis of catch and release. So families, if you come here with a kid, that's your automatic ticket in the United States. They have to address that. If they don't address that, we are actively right now creating the next wave of individuals that will be wanting amnesty in 5 or 6 years from now. So that has to be addressed. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPRA, which tells us if you're a child from Mexico or Canada, we get to send you back from your families. But if you're from a country outside of that, the Northern Triangle countries, we keep you. It makes no sense. The credible fear standard, there is no standard at all with the credible fear. You say the magic words, you automatically get involved in the asylum process. We have to fix that.
Let's talk a little bit more about Amnesty. I know you had a recent piece out for the Daily Signal that you co-authored with Anna Quintana. She's been on before talking about the same topic of immigration. Your title of your article, How Amnesty Causes Human Misery, Endangers Public Health. Something you wrote about was in regard to COVID-19 and the pandemic. You write that to date, there is no plan in place to test the migrants once they arrive before releasing them into the United States. Now, the pandemic, for the majority of the time happened under the Trump administration. Why wasn't some type of, testing system put in place? And do you anticipate that something is going to happen under the Biden administration to address that?
So no, and we didn't need testing. And I think we're asking the wrong question, right? Is that if we're asking the question about why aren't we testing those that illegally enter the United States, we're just providing another incentive. So we're saying in the middle of a global pandemic, while Americans are dying, kids aren't going to school, our businesses aren't closing, people are just struggling how they're going to pay their mortgage. We're going to tell those that want to illegally enter the border, illegally enter, and then we will test you, and we will eventually give you vaccines. That's the wrong premise. The premise which the President Trump did do was give us the authority under CDC Title 42. That authority under the public health gave CBP, specifically the Border Patrol, the ability to those that were illegally entering to process them right on the border. They weren't bringing them into the facilities. They weren't releasing them to the United States. They were processing most of the time within a couple hours and removing them to Mexico. That's what we needed to do, and that's what we were doing under the Trump administration, and it was an effective containment and mitigation strategy. Right now, you don't hear President Biden talking about that much, that the President Trump policy that was effective under COVID, because it's still in place. That's the only policy that's still in place. And Samantha, once Title 42 goes away, the numbers we're seeing at the southwest border right now, the crisis level numbers, will become a catastrophic crisis overnight, because that 3,500 a day that we're seeing will now be released into our facilities and then released into the United States, all while we're going through a global pandemic.
Something you also write was that the left often paints amnesty as a humanitarian act, but clearly the facts paint a darker reality. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so that's the other issue is that to talk about giving the amnesty to the people that are here while we're not addressing what's going on right now, let me give you a couple of quick things, right? We don't talk enough about this. Is first of all, There are hundreds of people that die every single year trying to illegally enter the border, whether that's drowning, exposure, it goes on and on, being locked in tractor trailers that reach over 110 degrees. It goes on and on and on. They're also exploited. Facts. These have been independent, non-government agencies that have done research and provided statistics that young women and children are often abused and exploited during their trip up to here. The other thing that we don't talk about enough is trafficking. There is a considerable amount of people that while they're being smuggled, Samantha, they're also being trafficked. They don't even know it, but they don't know it till it's too late, till they're already in the United States, whether they sneak across undetected or they're released by the U.S. government. And then the cartels and human smuggling organizations recontact them and say, oh, hey, you know what? You owe us more money for getting you in. They don't have it. And then that's how the trafficking begins.
I know in your article you also talked about this 2-month DNA testing pilot program in El Paso and McAllen, Texas, back in 2019, that upwards of 20% of families tested were fakes. So just goes to show and really, emphasizes the crisis with human trafficking that is happening at the border. And of course, I'm sure that's an issue that's not going away anytime soon. So I'd love to have you back on to talk more about that. Mark Morgan, a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for joining me today.
You bet, Samantha, anytime.